May 20th, 1944, 22:40 hours. A marshy riverbank near Sarnaki, occupied Poland. The night was a suffocating blanket of black, moonless and damp. For Antoni Szczęsny, a 34-year-old engineer from Warsaw, the darkness was both a shield and a prison. Crouching in the reeds, the cold marsh water seeping into the worn leather of his boots, he listened. He was not listening for the familiar sounds of the occupation, the rumble of a German patrol truck on a distant road, the bark of a dog, the sharp command in a foreign tongue. He was listening for a sound from another world, a sound from the future. In the breast pocket of his coat, a small silver locket held a faded photograph of his wife, Ewa, and their young daughter. It was his only tangible connection to the life he had been forced to abandon, a life of lecture halls, blueprints, and the quiet, orderly pursuit of science. Now science was a monster. He was a soldier in a secret war, a ghost in his own land, a member of the Polish Home Army, the Armia Krajowa. His code name was Engineer, the Engineer. His mission tonight was an act of audacious, almost suicidal faith. For months, whispers had come through the underground network. Rumors of a new German weapon, a Wunderwaffe, being tested in the forest to the south. A weapon that flew without wings or a pilot, faster than sound, delivering death from the heavens with no warning. London was its intended target. His superiors in the resistance believed him. Allied command in London was desperate but skeptical. They needed proof. Physical proof. A blueprint, a schematic, a piece of the weapon itself. Suddenly it came. Not an explosion, but a deep guttural roar that seemed to tear the fabric of the night sky. It was followed by an eerie whistling shriek, a sound that violated the laws of nature as he knew them. It grew louder, closer, a descent of pure, malevolent energy. He pressed himself flat against the muddy earth, his heart hammering against his ribs. A cataclysmic impact, a concussion that vibrated through the ground and into his bones, followed by the sickening hiss of superheated metal plunging into the boggy earth of the Bug River. It had landed. One of the monsters had fallen. He knew with a terrifying clarity that a race had just begun. He and his small team of partisans, armed with little more than shovels and courage, had to get to that wreckage before the SS did. The fate of thousands, perhaps the very course of the war, lay buried in that steaming, muddy crater. And Adolf Hitler, in his remote wolf's lair, slept soundly, utterly oblivious that the heart of his most prized secret was about to be ripped out by a handful of men he considered subhuman. Deep within the secluded, pine-forested coastline of the Baltic Sea lay Peenemünde, the most advanced and secretive research facility in the Third Reich. It was a sprawling complex of laboratories, wind tunnels and launch pads, a technological fiefdom ruled by the brilliant, ambitious, and morally flexible Werner von Braun. Here, thousands of Germany's brightest scientists and engineers worked relentlessly to perfect the Aggregate 4, or A4 rocket, a weapon that would be known to the world by its terrifying propaganda designation, Vergeltungswaffe 2, or V2, the vengeance weapon. The V2 was a quantum leap in military technology. It was the world's first long-range, liquid-propellant ballistic missile. Standing over 14 meters tall and weighing nearly 13,000 kilograms, it was a marvel of engineering. Its powerful engine, burning a volatile mixture of liquid oxygen and a water-alcohol solution, generated over 25 tons of thrust, propelling the missile to an altitude of nearly 90 kilometers, to the very edge of space. It would then descend on its target at supersonic speeds exceeding 5,000 kilometers per hour. This velocity was its greatest asset and its most terrifying feature. Unlike the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 was effectively unstoppable. It could not be intercepted by fighter aircraft or shot down by anti-aircraft guns. Its arrival was announced only by the sonic boom that followed its one-ton warhead's detonation. The strategic purpose of the V-2 was twofold. First, it was a weapon of pure terror, designed to rain random, indiscriminate destruction upon London and other Allied cities, bypassing conventional defenses to strike at the heart of civilian morale. Hitler believed it could break the British will to fight. Second, it was a strategic tool intended to disrupt and delay the Allied war effort, particularly the massive buildup of forces in England for the inevitable invasion of Europe. The project was given the highest priority, consuming vast resources and relying on the brutal exploitation of slave labor from concentration camps like Mittelbau-Dora, where the rockets were later mass-produced. For Hitler, the V-2 was more than a weapon. It was a psychological panacea, a symbol of German technological supremacy that he believed would snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. The secrecy surrounding the program was absolute, enforced by the SS. The German High Command was convinced that the Allies knew nothing of substance about their new miracle weapon, and that its deployment would be a devastating, war-altering surprise. For Antoni Szczęsny and the Polish Home Army, the war was a daily struggle for survival, fought in the shadows. The Armia Krajowa, AK, was one of the largest and most sophisticated resistance movements in occupied Europe, a secret state complete with its own government, courts, and a vast intelligence apparatus. Their primary mission was sabotage, disruption, and most critically, intelligence gathering. They were the eyes and ears of the Allies deep inside enemy territory. From early 1943, the AK's intelligence network, codenamed Lombard, began picking up strange signals. Reports from railway workers noted unusual, heavily guarded transports carrying massive cylindrical objects. Informants working near a new German experimental range at Blizna, in southern Poland, spoke of bizarre trials, of thunderous roars and rockets that disappeared into the sky. These fragments of information were painstakingly collected, cross-referenced, and analyzed by the AK's Bureau of Intelligence and Propaganda. Antoni, with his pre-war engineering background, was a key figure in this analysis. He and his colleagues understood they were dealing with a new form of rocketry, far beyond anything previously seen. The challenge was immense. They were operating under the constant threat of the Gestapo. Discovery meant immediate torture and execution, not just for them, but for their families. Every meeting was clandestine, every message passed in code, every contact a potential betrayal. The mission from London, relayed via coded radio transmissions, was explicit. We need hard evidence. Specifications, photographs, or preferably physical parts. Getting inside the test facility was impossible. Sabotaging a launch was too risky and might destroy the very evidence they needed. The only viable strategy was a grim one, to wait for a failure. They knew the rockets were still experimental and that malfunctions were common. The AK meticulously mapped the trajectory of the test flights from Blizna, stationing teams of observers and recovery specialists like Antoni's along the likely flight path. Their entire operation was a high-stakes gamble on German engineering imperfection. They were hunters, waiting for a mechanical beast to fall from the sky, hoping it would land where they, and not the Germans, could find it first. The German perception of security surrounding the V2 program was rooted in a profound and ultimately fatal arrogance. The Reich's leadership, from Hitler down to the SS officers guarding the facilities, held the Polish population in contempt. They were considered Untermenschen, a subjugated people incapable of organized, sophisticated resistance. The idea that a network of Polish engineers, farmers, and foresters could mount a serious intelligence threat to their most advanced military project was considered laughable. Security was brutal, and in their minds, foolproof. Peenemünde, and later the Blizna test range, were surrounded by concentric rings of security zones, patrolled by the SS. Local populations were forcibly relocated, and a scorched earth policy was applied to anyone found in the restricted areas. Any Pole caught showing undue interest in the facilities was summarily executed. The Germans believed that terror was a sufficient deterrent. Furthermore, they had immense faith in their own procedures. Whenever a V2 test missile crashed, specialized SS recovery teams were immediately dispatched to the impact site. Their orders were to retrieve every last nut and bolt, and to sanitize the area, removing any trace of the secret weapon. They worked with ruthless German efficiency. In their calculus, the chances of a missile crashing, being found by the resistance, and its components being successfully analyzed and exfiltrated were statistically insignificant. This mindset created a critical blind spot. They underestimated the ingenuity and resolve of the Polish Home Army. They underestimated their deep roots within the local population, which provided a network of eyes and ears that the SS could never completely eradicate, and they failed to comprehend that their own terror tactics had forged a resistance movement with nothing left to lose. Hitler was obsessed with the offensive power of his new weapon, but he and his commanders gave little serious thought to the defensive weakness of their own secrecy. They believed their secrets were safe, locked away behind barbed wire and a wall of fear. They never expected that the greatest breach would come not from a high-level Allied spy, but from the very earth of the country they so brutally occupied. The V2 that shrieked into the Bug River near Sarnaki on May 20, 1944, had been a dud. Its main warhead failed to detonate upon impact, and the soft, boggy ground had cushioned the crash, preserving large sections of the missile. For Antoni Szczęsny's team, it was the miracle they had prayed for. The race began. A local farmer on horseback was immediately dispatched to alert other AK units, while Antoni and his men secured the site. They knew a German aerial search would begin at dawn. They had only a few hours of darkness. Working frantically, submerged up to their chests in the cold, murky water, they used ropes and farm horses to haul the massive mud-caked sections of the rocket onto the riverbank. The work was brutal, silent, and illuminated only by the faint starlight and a few heavily shielded lanterns. The air was thick with the acrid, unfamiliar smell of the rocket's exotic fuels. Antoni, his engineer's mind racing, directed the disassembly. They were not just salvagers. They were surgical technicians. Using wrenches and crowbars, they carefully removed the most critical components. The gyroscopic guidance system, a complex sphere of whirring rotors and accelerometers that acted as the missile's brain, was carefully detached. They extracted the radio receiver, which took steering commands during the initial launch phase. Most importantly, they managed to salvage the heart of the beast, the main combustion chamber, the turbine pump, and the fuel injector system. As dawn approached, a human chain of local villagers, men, women, and even children, was formed. The precious heavy components were passed hand to hand, away from the river, and hidden. Some parts were buried in a barn beneath a pile of potatoes. The delicate guidance system was concealed in a specially modified cask. Other sections were loaded onto a hay cart and driven to a different village. The larger fuselage sections, too big to move far, were sunk back into the deepest part of the river. By the time the German search parties arrived later that morning, they found a wide, muddy crater and some scattered, unidentifiable scraps of metal. The official German report concluded that the missile had completely disintegrated on impact, its warhead detonating as designed. The deception was perfect. The Germans abandoned the search, convinced their secret was safe. Meanwhile, hidden in barns and cellars across the Polish countryside, lay the complete technical blueprint of Hitler's wonder weapon. The heist was complete. Possessing the V2 components was one thing. Getting them into the hands of Allied scientists in London was another, seemingly impossible challenge. The parts were far too bulky and heavy to be smuggled out by a courier crossing guarded borders. The intelligence was priceless but useless as long as it remained in Poland. The solution proposed by the AK leadership and approved by the Special Operations Executive SOE in London was audacious to the point of madness. They would land an Allied aircraft in the heart of occupied Poland, load the cargo, and fly it out. The mission was codenamed Operation Wildhorn III, known in Poland as Most III, or Bridge III. A remote abandoned field in southern Poland was chosen as the makeshift runway. For weeks, under the noses of German patrols, AK partisans worked secretly, at night to level the field, fill in ditches, and mark out a landing strip. The risks were astronomical. The sound of the aircraft could alert nearby German garrisons. A mechanical failure, a miscalculation by the pilot, or a simple betrayal could lead to disaster for everyone involved. On the night of July 25, 1944, Antoni Szczęsny waited at the clandestine airstrip, codenamed Motyl, Butterfly, alongside the precious cargo, now carefully packed into canisters and crates. He had been chosen to accompany the parts to London to help brief the British scientists. The tension was unbearable. Hours passed. Finally, they heard it. The low, distinct drone of the twin engines of a C-47 Dakota. The partisans lit the flare path, 3 bonfires in a line. The pilot, a specially trained RAF officer, brought the unarmed transport plane down in a masterful short-field landing on the rough, grassy strip. The engines were never shut down. With the propellers still turning, the AK soldiers frantically loaded the 200 pounds of V2 components and other intelligence materials. Several high-value Polish and British agents also scrambled aboard. Within 7 minutes of touching down, the Dakota was taxiing for takeoff. As it lumbered into the night sky, clearing the treetops by mere feet, German machine gun fire opened. Up from the edge of the woods, alerted at the last moment. But it was too late. The plane and the V2 secrets were gone. The arrival of the C-47 Dakota in Brindisi, Italy, and the subsequent transfer of its cargo to London sent a shockwave through the highest levels of Allied intelligence. At the Yar, Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough. British scientists and engineers uncrated the Polish delivery with a sense of awe. It was an intelligence coup of unprecedented importance. Working around the clock, they analyzed every component. The salvaged parts confirmed their worst fears about the rocket's sophistication, but also provided critical intelligence that disarmed its psychological power. By reverse engineering the guidance system, they determined the V-2's inherent inaccuracy. It was a terror weapon, not a precision one. They analyzed the fuel mixture, which allowed them to identify the key chemical components, like liquid oxygen, and target their production facilities in strategic bombing raids. They calculated its maximum range, which helped them reassure the public that areas beyond a certain distance from the launch sites in the Netherlands were safe. When the first V-2s began to fall on London on September 8, 1944, the attack was not the complete bolt-from-the-blue surprise Hitler had intended. The British government, armed with the Polish intelligence, knew what the weapon was, how it worked, and what its limitations were. This knowledge allowed them to manage the public response, counter German propaganda with facts, and implement effective civil defense measures. The terror was real. Over 9,000 civilians and military personnel would be killed by V-2 attacks. But the strategic panic Hitler had counted on never materialized. Meanwhile, in his headquarters, Hitler and his generals remained blissfully unaware of the catastrophic intelligence breach. They monitored Allied press reports for signs of panic and confusion, interpreting the calm, measured British response as evidence of their famous stiff upper lip. They never suspected it was a calmness born of foreknowledge. The V-2 was deployed as a revolutionary weapon, but its greatest advantage, the element of surprise, had been stolen months before its first operational use. The psychological battle had been lost before the first shot was even fired. The V-2 offensive failed to achieve any of its strategic objectives. It did not break British morale, nor did it halt the Allied advance across Europe. The war was won on the battlefields of Normandy and the plains of Russia, not in the skies above London. The intelligence heroically secured by the Polish Home Army had played a crucial role in neutralizing the weapon's strategic and psychological impact, saving countless lives by preparing the Allies for the onslaught. The legacy of this incredible act of espionage extends far beyond the Second World War. The technical secrets of the V-2, painstakingly recovered from a Polish marsh and flown to London, became the foundational text for the age of ballistic missiles and space exploration. After the war, the United States and the Soviet Union scrambled to capture German rocket scientists and technology. Werner von Braun and his team, who had developed the V-2, were taken to America to lead its space program, culminating in the Apollo moon landings. The technology that Antony Szczęsny helped steal was the direct ancestor of the Saturn V rocket that took humanity to another world. The irony is profound. A weapon of terror, created by a totalitarian regime to enslave a continent, was secretly compromised by the very people it was meant to crush. The intelligence they gathered not only helped win the war, but also inadvertently laid the groundwork for one of humanity's greatest scientific achievements. Hitler went to his grave in the ruins of Berlin, never knowing that his most cherished vengeance weapon had been analytically dismantled by his enemies before it was even fully deployed. He never knew of the C-47 landing on a secret airstrip, or of the Polish engineer who carried his secrets to London. The story of Operation Wildhorn III remains one of the most remarkable and unsung intelligence victories of the war, a testament to the fact that courage, ingenuity, and a few shovels in a dark, muddy field can be more powerful than the most advanced weapon on Earth.